Welcome to Top Stories Hub. Today we've got a new story, a mystery you'll want to unravel. The envelope lay on the kitchen island, its immaculate white surface and etched silver script shimmering under the glow of the pendant lights above. Sarah Mitchell had flipped it over in her hands more times than she could count, her fingers gliding over the refined cursive spelling out her name. The return address was undeniable, a frigid, sprawling mansion she'd once called home. It was obvious this wasn't meant for her eyes. Her younger brother, Tyler, had never bothered to hide his scorn for her, and their parents had been even more blatant when they cast her aside like an unwanted relic over a decade ago. Still, there it was, an invitation to his extravagant wedding, set to unfold at one of the city's most luxurious five-star venues. "You're not actually thinking of showing up, are you?" Luke, her husband, asked from across the room, his voice even but carrying a perceptive edge. Sarah gently placed the invitation down and let out a slow breath. "It's got to be a mistake. They didn't mean to send me this, probably just a careless bulk mailing from their event team." Luke crossed his arms, his piercing, thoughtful eyes gauging her response. "Then toss it in the garbage where it deserves to be." She could do that. She probably should. But a piece of her, buried deep beneath layers of hard-earned resilience, sparked with curiosity. For years, she'd clawed her way up from nothing, determined to show, not them, but herself, that she was more than the boundaries they'd forced upon her. They'd thrown her out, expecting her to fade into nothingness, but she'd achieved the unthinkable. She'd thrived. And now, by some fluke, they'd handed her a chance she never imagined she'd get. "I think I want to go," she confessed at last. Luke raised an eyebrow, not out of shock but with a quiet nod of understanding. "All right, then we're going." Her gaze drifted to the living room, where their 5-year-old son, Noah, sat cross-legged on the rug, stacking vibrant blocks into a tower. He hummed softly, completely unaware of the emotional tempest swirling within her. "Noah, too?" she asked, her voice tinged with hesitation. Luke's face softened just a touch. "He deserves to see the kind of people his mom surpassed." And with that, the choice was settled. The hotel was exactly as she'd pictured, opulent, over the top, crafted for those who equated wealth with dominance. Crystal chandeliers gleamed above a ballroom vast enough to host dignitaries, adorned with towering floral displays in striking hues of cream and gold. The atmosphere hummed with polite chuckles and superficial chatter, the sort only the elite could sustain for hours without saying anything meaningful. Sarah entered with her chin up, her sleek black gown accentuating her figure in a way that radiated poise and understated strength. Luke, at her side in a sharp tailored suit, exuded the aura of a man who earned respect without needing to speak. Noah held her hand tightly, his curious eyes sweeping the room with the innocent wonder of a child untouched by the harshness his mother had once faced. As she ventured further into the venue, the heavy burden of her past settled over her like a suffocating cloak. This was the world that had shunned her, the crowd that had judged her unworthy, the family that had chosen to erase her existence. But standing there, enveloped by their extravagance, she realized something profound: she no longer felt diminished. She overheard the first murmurs before they even noticed her. "I didn't think she'd show. Was she invited on purpose? Look at her, strutting in like she owns the place." Sarah brushed them off. Their words were insignificant compared to the trials she'd overcome. But then, as she neared the seating area, she saw them, her parents, standing by the head table, engrossed in conversation with Tyler and his fiancée, Abigail. For a fleeting moment, no one registered her presence. Then her mother turned, her lips twisting into an expression that wasn't shock or anger but something uglier, contempt, the kind only a mother who'd never truly cherished her daughter could muster. Sarah held her gaze, unflinching, letting them take in every inch of her. The daughter they'd discarded stood before them, unbroken, undaunted, and undeniably whole. Tyler's eyes widened just a fraction, his expression flickering between confusion and annoyance. He glanced at his mother, as if expecting her to take action. But before anyone could move, the wedding planner took the stage, signaling the start of the ceremony. For now, they had no choice but to act as if she wasn't there. Sarah guided Luke and Noah to their seats, ignoring the venomous stares aimed her way. As she settled in, she exhaled slowly, grounding herself. Her mere presence was a victory. They just hadn't realized it yet. The ceremony was as ostentatious as she'd anticipated, vows dripping with practiced emotion, a spectacle tailored for the dozens of high society guests rather than the couple themselves. Sarah barely focused on it. Instead, she observed. She noted how her father's fingers tightened around his champagne flute each time his eyes darted toward her. She saw the strain in her mother's jaw, the way Tyler stole subtle glances her way, as if her existence alone threatened to unravel everything. And then there was Abigail, Tyler's flawless bride, draped in a gown worth more than most people's annual income. She hadn't acknowledged Sarah directly, but her eyes held something keen and wary, as if she sensed an undercurrent of trouble. Intriguing. As the ceremony gave way to the reception, Sarah slipped away to the restroom, craving a brief escape from the stifling ambience. Luke stayed at the table with Noah, his eyes following her but trusting her to handle herself. Stepping into the softly lit hallway leading to the restrooms, she caught a glimpse of movement in the reflection of an ornate mirror. She wasn't alone. Familiar voices, sharp and cutting, floated toward her. "I can't believe she had the nerve to show up," Sarah froze. Her mother's voice, dripping with disdain. Tyler's tone followed, thick with frustration. "She wasn't supposed to be invited. Is she here to stir up trouble?" Naturally, her mother sneered. That failure's always been desperate for the spotlight. Sarah's hands balled into fists, the old scars they'd inflicted threatening to reopen for a moment before she shut them out. She'd spent years rising above their malice. She wouldn't let them pull her back down. So, rather than confronting them, she stepped forward, revealing herself. Her mother stopped mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing the instant she saw her. Tyler, standing nearby, let out a derisive scoff. "What's this? No words for me?" Sarah tilted her head, a sly, confident smile playing on her lips. Tyler's brow furrowed. "What's so amusing?" She locked eyes with him, unwavering. "That you still believe your opinion matters to me." Then she spun on her heel and strode away, leaving them stunned and silent. She'd come out of curiosity, but now she had a purpose to stay. Sarah moved deliberately as she exited the dim corridor, her mother's words sticking to her like grime she couldn't scrub off. But she refused to let them see her falter, not now, not ever. She'd anticipated their cruelty, it was all they'd ever offered her. Yet, standing in the midst of this lavish wedding reception, she saw how little they'd changed. Their contempt was as biting as ever, their words as poisonous, their view of her as distorted as the day they'd cast her out. The past wasn't just a shadow trailing her, it was alive, whispering taunts in her ear. But she was no longer the terrified 19-year-old they'd broken. Sarah let out a quiet breath through her nose, adjusting the delicate strap of her dress to ease the tension in her shoulders. She'd vowed not to let them get to her, not after all she'd achieved, not after becoming someone they could never shatter. Still, she needed a moment to herself. She headed for the restroom at the end of the hall, pushing the door open with steady hands. The lighting was gentle, casting a warm glow across the spotless marble counters. The air carried the scent of costly floral perfume and crisp linens, offering a fleeting moment of calm. Then the voices returned, familiar and venomous. "She has no right to be here," her mother's voice sliced through the stillness, sharp with barely veiled scorn. "She wasn't on the guest list," Tyler added, his tone laced with irritation. "Who let her think she could just waltz in?" Sarah's fingers gripped the cool marble edge of the counter. She stayed still, silent. Long ago, she'd learned that people showed their true colors when they thought no one was watching. "Oh, come on," her mother mocked. "You think she believes she fits in? That creature's nothing but a walking embarrassment. She probably snuck in to cause a scene. Always craving attention. A flaw. That's what her mother had always labeled her. That's what she remained in her eyes. Sarah's jaw tightened. Those words shouldn't sting anymore, not after years of detachment, but their casual delivery, as if they were undeniable truths, clawed at her in a way she loathed. She forced herself to breathe deeply, evenly. She wasn't that girl anymore. She held power now, a strength they couldn't even fathom. Tyler let out a frustrated huff. She doesn't belong here. They should have security escort her out. Tyler, another voice cut in. Abigail. She was there too. She's still your sister, Abigail said, her tone more inquisitive than protective. Sister? Tyler gave a bitter chuckle. She forfeited that role a long time ago. Abigail let out a thoughtful hum, as if pondering something. Even so, she seems changed. Sarah permitted herself a faint, private smirk. Of course she did. She was no longer the frail, silent girl they'd abandoned. She wasn't the desperate nobody they'd assumed she'd become. She'd shed that old self long ago. Sarah squared her shoulders and moved toward the door, her heels clicking purposefully against the marble. She pushed it open without pause, stepping into their view. Silence fell. Tyler's face hardened the moment he saw her. Her mother's expression twisted into something cold and bitter. But Abigail studied her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Sarah tilted her head, letting a slow, pointed smile spread across her face. She had their full attention now. I don't think we've been properly introduced, she said, her voice smooth and confident. Abigail's eyes flicked to Tyler, but she offered her hand anyway. Abigail Hayes. Sarah clasped it firmly. Sarah Mitchell. Mitchell, Abigail echoed, blinking in surprise. You kept the family name. Sarah let out a soft, amused laugh, releasing her hand. Oh, honey, I didn't keep it. She shifted her gaze to Tyler, her smile sharpening. I took it back. Tyler's jaw clenched. You don't belong here. Sarah raised a single brow, unfazed. Yet here I stand. Tyler took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. Get out. Sarah stood her ground, completely unshaken. Make me. His mouth opened, likely to spit out some hollow threat, but he faltered. Because he knew. He knew he had no power over her anymore, and that made this moment all the more satisfying. Tyler let out a sharp breath, his temper unraveling. You don't belong here, Sarah. Nobody wants you around. Sarah gave a soft hum, unfazed. Oh, really? Tyler's fists tightened, his face flushing with anger. Then, in a move so obvious it was almost comical, he reached for her arm. Big mistake. The second his fingers closed around her wrist, a tense calm settled over them. Sarah slowly raised her eyes to meet his, letting him catch the glint of amusement dancing in her gaze. Tyler had always been impulsive, ruled by fury rather than reason, and he just handed her the upper hand. Abigail let out a faint, startled gasp. Sarah's lips curved into a smile. I'd rethink that if I were you, she said softly, her voice carrying a subtle edge that made Tyler pause. His grip eased just a fraction, but he didn't let go. Sarah leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a near whisper. You really don't have a clue, do you? Tyler's brow creased in confusion. What's that supposed to mean? She tilted her head, studying the growing unease in his eyes. He was clueless, completely in the dark. And that? That was downright intriguing. With a gentle twist, she freed her wrist from his grasp, stepping back to smooth the fabric of her dress. Tyler's eyes darted to Abigail, as if expecting her to back him up, but Abigail wasn't focused on him. Her gaze was fixed on Sarah, and in her eyes, Sarah saw it, the first spark of doubt, of suspicion, of something close to fear. This wasn't just some fleeting confidence Sarah was projecting. It wasn't a performance. No, it was something deeper, something Abigail couldn't yet pinpoint, but she'd figure it out soon enough. Sarah turned toward the hallway's exit, tossing a final glance over her shoulder. "Enjoy your big day, little brother," she said with a light, teasing tone. "It might not last as long as you think." Then she strode away, no need to look back to know Tyler was fuming. The night was just getting started, and she could feel it. The past had a sneaky way of slipping back in, weaving through the cracks in your mind, biding its time for the perfect moment to pounce. Sarah had spent years burying hers, piling her successes over her pain like stones in a wall too high for anything to break through. But standing in that lavish ballroom, surrounded by the people who turned her childhood into a nightmare, she felt it stirring again. The memories pressed in, murmuring reminders of who she used to be, of the person they tried to mold her into. Tyler's voice still rang in her head, dripping with arrogance and venom. His grip on her wrist was nothing compared to the chokehold their family had once had on her entire life. Abigail's cautious stare lingered in her thoughts, too, but it was her mother's words that hit the hardest, that failure. A brand. A condemnation. A constant reminder of her place in the world they'd constructed. The music swelled as the reception carried on, the newlyweds stepping into the spotlight for their first dance. Guests watched in awe, cameras flashing, laughter echoing through the hall. Sarah barely registered any of it. Her eyes tracked Tyler and Abigail's graceful movements, but her mind was elsewhere, lost in another time. 12 years earlier, the Mitchell estate stood like a monument to wealth, cold and uninviting. Its towering columns loomed like silent sentinels against the dreary sky. Inside, everything was pristine, meticulous, flawless, just as her parents demanded. Sarah had never belonged in that world. She was 16 when she first realized her parents didn't just disapprove of her, they loathed her. She'd always been the odd one out in the family, clumsy, reserved, missing the polished beauty of her mother or the effortless charm of her father. Tyler was their shining star, while she was a blemish. He was brilliant, she was lackluster. He excelled, she was a disappointment. Her missteps were spotlighted, her successes overlooked. At 17, she'd pleaded to apply for college, desperate to show she was more than their low expectations. Her father's response was quick, brutal, and final: "Why throw money at something that'll never pay off?" Her mother's agreement was even harsher: "You're not cut out for it, Sarah. Just deal with it." Tyler had smirked, reveling in the certainty that he'd always be their favorite, that Sarah would never be more than the family's unwanted heir. It was Tyler who delivered the killing blow, crushing her hopes with the kind of careless cruelty only he could muster: "They're not wasting their resources on you. You're a lost cause." It was the unvarnished truth, spoken without a hint of regret. To them, she was nothing. That was the moment she knew she had to get out. At 19, her father made it official. He summoned her to a so-called meeting, though it was more of a sentencing, with no room for her input. She sat in the grand study, surrounded by leather-bound books she was never permitted to touch, as her parents issued their decree: "You're old enough to fend for yourself. There's no reason for you to stay." They framed it as a practical choice, a logical step, but the reality was stark: they were discarding her. Her mother's lips twisted in disgust as she slid an envelope across the desk, a check, not a gesture of support, but a final transaction to erase their obligation. "Take it and don't come back." Tyler stood by their father, arms folded, a smug grin on his face. He said nothing, but he didn't need to. His eyes screamed it: good riddance. Sarah left that house with just a duffel bag and a shattered spirit. They hadn't expected her to make it. They thought she'd fail, come crawling back, begging. She never did. Instead, she vanished from their lives, exactly as they'd wanted. What they didn't know, what they never even considered, was that she didn't fade into oblivion. She rebuilt herself from the ground up. Back in the present, Sarah's fingers wrapped around the delicate stem of her champagne flute, her nails lightly tapping the glass. They still saw her as worthless, still thought she was beneath them. They had no idea who she'd become. The realization sent a quiet, triumphant warmth spreading through her. Oh, but they were about to find out. She took a slow sip of her champagne, her eyes fixed on Tyler and Abigail as they glided across the dance floor. Abigail murmured something to him, her brow slightly creased. Tyler's smile held steady, but Sarah caught the tension in his grip, the fleeting shadow of worry in his eyes. He sensed it, even if he didn't fully grasp it yet. Something was off. Something was coming. Sarah let out a soft breath, a subtle, knowing smile tugging at her lips. They were completely unprepared for what was about to hit them. Across the room, Luke met her gaze, his expression unreadable but heavy with intent. She knew what he was thinking, they weren't just here for a wedding. They were here to settle a score. And by the end of the night, the Mitchell family would be irreparably broken. The music surged again, applause breaking out as the couple's dance came to a close. Guests began to mingle, conversations shifting, laughter filling the air. Sarah stayed seated, her fingers lazily tracing the rim of her glass. She felt their eyes on her now, her parents, Tyler, even Abigail. They were watching, wondering, dreading. Sarah didn't budge. She let them stew, let them taste the unfamiliar sting of uncertainty. She'd spent years under their thumb, powerless. It was only right that they endure one night feeling what it was like to be helpless. She took another sip of champagne and smirked. Let the real show begin. The tension in the ballroom was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it, but Sarah could sense it building, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. A shift in the atmosphere, a quiet agreement that something was wrong, though no one could quite pinpoint what. Except her. Sarah sat perfectly still, her champagne barely touched, observing the people who'd once cast her aside as they carried on with their festivities. Tyler, her brother, the prized heir to their father's legal dynasty, stood at the heart of it all, soaking up the admiration of his guests. He was the epitome of success in their world, polished, self-assured, invincible. But his time was running out. From her seat, she noticed Abigail stealing glances her way, her carefully practiced smile slipping each time their eyes locked. There was something in her gaze, hesitation, a spark of suspicion. She wasn't naive. She'd picked up on the slight change in Tyler's demeanor the moment he saw Sarah. Abigail was starting to question things, and she had every reason to. The music was a faint drone in Sarah's ears as she leaned back, her fingers lightly tapping the stem of her glass. She was biding her time, waiting for the moment her husband, Luke, would make his entrance. And then, as if on cue, the atmosphere shifted. The ballroom doors opened slowly, deliberately, and the instant Luke stepped inside, the room's chatter took on a new tone, recognition, unease, dread. Sarah smiled. Luke Mitchell wasn't just any man. He was authority personified, a figure impossible to ignore. His crisp, tailored suit did little to mask the quiet intensity that seemed to radiate from him. He moved with the effortless confidence of someone who knew precisely who he was and what he could do. And tonight, he was here for one purpose, to remind them all of what they'd thrown away. Sarah caught the exact moment Tyler's demeanor cracked. His shoulders tensed, his easy confidence faltering for the first time that night. He looked at Luke like a man facing his judge and jury. Because, in many ways, he was. Sarah rose smoothly, brushing out the folds of her gown as she crossed the room toward her husband. Luke met her halfway, his lips twitching into a faint, amused smile as he surveyed the ballroom, taking in the array of familiar faces now frozen in varying shades of discomfort. Having fun, he murmured, his voice a low, steady hum meant only for her. Sarah tilted her head, her grin playful. But I think it's time we shake things up a bit. Luke let out a quiet chuckle, his hand settling lightly at the small of her back in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. Together, they faced the people who'd once dismissed her as nothing. The silence stretched, heavy and oppressive, thick with the weight of their shared history. Tyler was the first to break it, his voice taut, strained with forced politeness. "What are you doing here?" Sarah let her lips part slightly, as if mulling over the question. Just here for my brother's wedding. Isn't that what families do? Tyler's jaw tightened. You. He cut off as his father stepped forward. The elder Mitchell, a man who'd built a career on dominating every room he entered, looked ashen for the first time Sarah could remember. His eyes darted between her and Luke, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. Luke was watching him now, and Sarah knew what was going through his mind: recognition, realization, fear. Sarah let the quiet linger, relishing the weight of it. Then, with a measured breath, she landed her opening blow. "Allow me to introduce my husband," she announced, her voice resonating across the silent ballroom, reaching every shadowed corner of the lavish space. "Luke Mitchell. The attorney whose firm crushed yours last year." A wave of stunned gasps rippled through the onlookers. Tyler staggered back a step, his composure shaken. Their father's hands balled into tight fists at his sides. Sarah could pinpoint the exact moment the reality hit them, the instant they realized Luke wasn't just some affluent man she'd wed. He was the one who toppled the empire they'd thought was invincible. And now, here he stood among them, calm and unimpressed, as if they were nothing more than a trivial annoyance. Tyler's face flushed with rage. "You." Luke cut him off, his voice carrying the effortless command of someone accustomed to being heard. "You're looking a bit pale, Tyler," he said smoothly, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Did I strike a nerve?" Tyler's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Sarah raised a hand, her expression one of mock worry. "You're trembling, little brother." Abigail, standing just behind Tyler, fixed her fiancé with wide, scrutinizing eyes. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into the stem of her champagne flute, her face a mask of unreadable emotion. Sarah shifted her focus to their parents. "You never once checked on me after you kicked me out," she said, tilting her head with a curious air. "I've always wondered why. Was it because you didn't give a damn, or were you scared of what you might discover?" Her father's lips pressed into a thin line. "You were never going to be anything worthwhile." Sarah let out a soft, almost sympathetic chuckle. "That's the story you fed yourselves, right? That I'd crash and burn, that I'd amount to nothing without your wealth or your network." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Tell me, does it sting to know the daughter you threw away now towers over you?" Her mother's face contorted with revulsion. "You think this puts you above us?" Sarah didn't flinch. "I'm certain of it." A fresh surge of hushed murmurs swept through the crowd, shocked whispers bouncing from table to table. Sarah could see it unfolding. Tyler's self-assurance was fraying at the edges, their father's anger barely masking his growing dread. And Abigail was still staring, her mind clearly racing to piece something together. Then, as if she couldn't hold it in, she spoke. "You told me she never finished high school," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Tyler flinched visibly. Abigail turned to face him fully, her eyes now sharp and calculating. "You said she was a nobody." Sarah's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Is that the tale he spun for you?" Abigail's grip on her glass tightened, her knuckles whitening. Sarah let out a slow, deliberate breath, letting her words sink in. This was just the start. She'd lived in their shadows for years, brushed off and discarded like trash. But tonight, she wasn't the broken girl they'd left behind. She was the storm they never saw brewing. And before the night was through, they'd feel the full weight of their errors. The silence stretched like a tightly pulled cord, the tension so dense it seemed to choke the air from the room. Sarah stood tall, her chin high, her gaze steady, letting the truth settle in, slowly, oppressively, like a trap closing around Tyler's carefully crafted world. Her brother looked like he'd been slapped. His shoulders stiffened, his usual cocky smirk replaced by something raw and exposed: fear, shame, fury. Abigail's fingers shook against her champagne glass, the gravity of Sarah's words still hitting home, the realization that the man she'd agreed to marry, the man she trusted, had been deceiving her all along. You told me she was a high school dropout, Abigail repeated, her voice softer now, but carrying a dangerous edge. Tyler let out a harsh breath, clutching the edge of a chair to steady himself. His face flickered between denial and scheming, his lawyer's brain already scrambling for an escape. Abigail, it's not. She stepped back from him. You said she was nothing. Sarah watched with quiet satisfaction as Tyler stumbled, his polished exterior cracking at the seams. Abigail, he tried again, his voice softening as if he could smooth it over, you're not getting the full picture. Then make it clear, Abigail snapped, her tone cutting, her eyes cold as ice. Tell me why the woman you called worthless is standing here, casually explaining how she helped dismantle your father's empire. Sarah let the accusation linger in the air before adding, and he never saw it coming. Her words hit like a precision strike. Tyler's face twisted with fury. You think you're on top now? His voice was low, menacing. That waltzing in here, flaunting your status, makes you better than us? Sarah tilted her head, a spark of amusement in her eyes. Oh, Tyler, she said softly, I didn't show up to prove I'm better. I proved that years ago. Luke shifted beside her, his calm demeanor a silent warning. Her father, who'd been observing the exchange in rigid silence, finally spoke, his voice laced with anger. So, this is your game? Revenge? Sarah turned her gaze to him, unruffled. Revenge, she mused. No, Dad. Revenge would have been small-minded. What I've done is justice. Her mother scoffed, her sharp features twisting with contempt. You're just a bitter, ungrateful girl who couldn't cope. Cope with what? Sarah cut in smoothly, a dangerous glint in her eyes. Being treated like I was worthless. Being tossed aside while you fueled Tyler's ego. Being denied a future because you decided I didn't deserve one. Her mother's lip curled. You never deserved it. Luke stepped forward, his voice cool but laced with menace. And yet, here she stands. Above all of you. The guests had fallen completely silent, their eyes darting between the Mitchell family members as they witnessed the foundation of their prestige and power collapse in real time. Sarah turned back to Tyler, who stood rigid, his fists clenched at his sides. His face was a battlefield, panic, rage, humiliation clashing all at once. He wasn't used to defeat. He'd never had to face the reality that there were people stronger than him, that his actions had consequences. She decided to drive the point home. Abigail, she said, her tone carrying a playful lilt, has Tyler ever mentioned why his father's firm tanked last year? Abigail's frown deepened. What are you getting at? Luke's smile was cold, devoid of warmth, but the threat behind it was unmistakable. Tyler felt it too. His lips pressed into a tight line, his breathing quick and shallow as he struggled to keep his composure. But Abigail was staring at him now, her expression unreadable. Is it true? Tyler tore his eyes from Sarah, clearly shaken. What? Abigail's grip on her champagne glass was so tight her knuckles gleamed white. What Sarah just said. Is it true? Tyler hesitated. That was all the confirmation she needed. Sarah watched as something shifted in Abigail, a final piece of the puzzle snapping into place. You lied to me, she whispered, her voice barely audible but heavy with betrayal. Tyler lunged toward her, his desperation palpable. Abigail, hold on. But she was already slipping the engagement ring off with steady hands. She held it up between them, the diamond glinting under the ballroom's lights one final time before she let it fall to the polished floor with a careless flick. It struck the marble with a sharp, final clink. The crowd let out a collective gasp. Abigail's face remained unsettlingly composed. I won't marry a deceiver. Tyler's fists clenched, his body trembling with fury and shame. You're throwing everything away. Abigail raised an eyebrow, unfazed. No, Tyler. That was your mistake. Without another word, she spun on her heel and marched toward the exit, her steps resolute. The ballroom fell into a deafening hush. Tyler stood there, quaking, his face flushed with rage and humiliation. He whirled on Sarah, his voice a low snarl. Satisfied now? Sarah took a leisurely sip of her champagne, savoring the weight of the moment. Then she lowered the glass, her lips curling into a calm smile. Absolutely. With that single word, Tyler Mitchell's carefully constructed world shattered. The ring lay on the marble floor, its sparkle a stark reminder of all Tyler had lost in one devastating night. Silence bore down on the ballroom as guests traded quiet murmurs, their gazes flitting between Sarah, Tyler, and Abigail's departing silhouette. Abigail had left without a backward glance, and that, more than anything, sealed Tyler's downfall. He stood rooted to the spot, his chest heaving as his polished persona crumbled to dust. His entire existence had been built on triumph, status, and influence, things that had always fallen effortlessly into his lap. He was the favored son, the Mitchell family's shining star, the heir to his father's legal dynasty. But now, he was just a man watching his empire go up in flames. Sarah tilted her head, observing him with cool detachment. "You're looking a little ashen, little brother." Tyler's glare was pure poison. "Shut your mouth." Luke, who had stayed quiet through most of the confrontation, let out a soft breath and slipped his hands into his pockets with deliberate ease. "TCH, TCH, he murmured, shaking his head. "That's no way to talk to your sister, is it?" Tyler rounded on him, fists tight. "She's not my sister." Luke raised a brow, completely unruffled. "Funny, I'm pretty sure a DNA test would disagree." Sarah let out a soft, cutting chuckle, the sound sharp and deliberate. "Still clinging to that resentment, huh?" She took a step closer, her voice lowering to a pointed whisper. "Tell me, Tyler, is it because you know you can't erase me, no matter how much you try? No matter how desperately you wish it? I'm here. And worse, I've flourished. Without any of you." Tyler's jaw tightened, the strain visible in his face. Their father stepped forward then, his stance rigid, his expression unreadable. "This has gone too far." Sarah shifted her gaze to him, unperturbed. "Oh, has it?" Her father exhaled sharply through his nose, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He'd always been a master of control, priding himself on bending any situation to his will. But tonight, that grip was slipping. For the first time, he wasn't the one calling the shots. Luke leaned in slightly toward Sarah, his tone low and tinged with amusement. "Don't you think it's time we let them in on it?" Sarah hummed, tilting her head as if weighing the idea. "It'd be unkind to keep them guessing, wouldn't it?" Her mother, silent until now, let out a derisive scoff. "More of your little games. Just spit out whatever you came to say and get out." Sarah exhaled slowly, shaking her head with a faint smile. "Oh, Mom," she said softly, "I'm not sure you're ready to hear this." Tyler's patience snapped. "Hear what?" Luke's smile was slow, calculated. "Your little fraud issue." The color drained from Tyler's face, the room seeming to freeze around him. Sarah watched the panic ripple through him, his fists tightening, his breath quickening, his eyes widening just a fraction. He knew exactly what they meant. And now, so did everyone else. Luke went on, his tone light, almost chatty. "You see, while you were busy puffing up your ego, you overlooked a cardinal rule in the legal game: always cover your tracks." Tyler's hands twitched at his sides. "You're talking nonsense." Sarah's smirk was sharp as a blade. "Oh, we know exactly what we're talking about." Her father cut in, his voice low and menacing. "What the hell is this about?" Sarah turned to him deliberately, letting the tension build. "It's about your golden boy," she said softly, "the one you groomed to take over your firm, the one you shielded no matter what." She paused, letting the silence stretch before dropping the bombshell. "The one who's been tangled up in shady legal dealings." The crowd gasped, the sound echoing through the room. Sarah caught Abigail hesitating at the doorway, her posture stiffening. Even she hadn't been privy to this. Tyler's mother's face twisted in disbelief. That's a blatant lie. Sarah casually pulled out her phone, tapping the screen a few times before holding it up. A document appeared, legal records, financial transactions, emails, all tracing back to Tyler. Her father's face paled as he took a sharp step forward. Where did you get that? Sarah's smirk grew wider. Let's just say I've got my ways. Tyler's breathing was shallow, erratic. This isn't. Luke let out a quiet laugh. Having trouble finding your words, Tyler? Tyler's nostrils flared, his panic barely contained. He turned to his father, desperation creeping into his voice. Dad, His father didn't even glance at him. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen, the damning evidence laid bare for all to see. Then, slowly, he turned to his son. What have you done? Tyler's throat worked as he swallowed hard. I can fix it. His father's face was icy, unyielding. You lied to me. Tyler recoiled as if struck. Sarah watched the scene unfold, her pulse thrumming with satisfaction. She'd waited for this, not for revenge, but for justice. For too long, she'd been the one pushed aside. For too long, Tyler had strutted through life thinking he was untouchable. No more. Abigail turned back, her voice slicing through the heavy silence. I knew you were full of yourself, Tyler, she said quietly. I didn't realize you were this foolish. Tyler spun toward her, his panic surging. Abigail, please. She cut him off. You're a fraud. A liar. To think I nearly tied my life to yours. With that, she turned and walked out for good. Tyler stood there, trembling, his world collapsing around him. His father still stared at him like he was a disgrace. His mother was silent, her face etched with shock. The guests watched, waiting for the final strike. Sarah stepped closer, closing the gap between her and her brother. In a voice barely above a whisper, she said, You're done, Tyler. She let the words sink in before stepping back, turning to Luke. His hand settled gently at the small of her back, a silent anchor. Ready to go? Luke murmured. Sarah nodded, her voice steady. Let's. Sarah let out a quiet breath, giving a single nod. With that, they strolled out, hands clasped, leaving the chaos in their wake. Tyler Mitchell's future had just imploded, and Sarah Mitchell had never felt more unburdened. Sarah moved through the elegant corridor of the five-star hotel, her heels tapping lightly on the glossy marble floor. The heavy pressure that had weighed on her heart for years was gone, replaced by a serene, triumphant calm. She'd spent so long dreading that facing her family would hurt, that it would rip open scars she'd worked tirelessly to heal. But she'd been mistaken. Watching Tyler's world crumble hadn't left her bitter or remorseful. It had simply felt like the scales of justice finally balancing. Luke walked at her side, his presence steady and resolute. His hand rested gently at the small of her back, a quiet vow that he was there, always vigilant, always her shield. Their son, Liam, was waiting upstairs in the private lounge with their trusted nanny, far from the poisonous atmosphere and the toxic shadows of her past. They were nearly at the elevator when she heard it. Her mother's voice. Sarah. The word sliced through the stillness like a knife, sharp and laced with something unfamiliar, something Sarah might once have mistaken for desperation. She turned slowly, already anticipating the scene. Her parents stood a few feet away, their polished exteriors slightly frayed. Her mother's typically flawless posture was rigid with barely contained strain, her manicured nails gripping the fabric of her gown. Her father's face was a mask of forced calm, but his jaw was clenched, his eyes turbulent. For the first time, they weren't the ones holding the reins. Sarah tilted her head, surveying them with cool amusement. Something to say? Her mother's lips parted briefly before tightening into a thin line. There was a pause, as if she'd never imagined herself here, facing the daughter she'd discarded, forced to recognize her as more than a failure. Her father spoke first. "You've made your statement." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Oh, have I?" His nostrils flared slightly, but his voice stayed even. "Tyler's finished. You got your revenge. There's no need to push this any further." Luke let out a soft chuckle beside her. Well, he mused, "now you're ready to bargain." Her mother's glare shot to him. "This is family business. You don't belong in it." Luke's expression didn't waver, but his tone turned icy. "Sarah's my wife. That makes it my concern." Her mother's eyes flashed with disdain, but she didn't push back. Sarah exhaled deliberately, her gaze returning to her father. "You think this is about making things worse?" She stepped forward, her voice soft but cutting like a blade. "No, Dad. This is about accountability." Her mother scoffed. "Don't play the martyr, Sarah. You came here with an agenda. You wanted to humiliate us." Sarah let out a gentle breath. "Wrong," she corrected. "I showed up because you sent me that invitation, by accident, I'm guessing." She let the words hang before adding, "But yeah, once I saw you all, I decided it was time for some long overdue reckoning." Her father's jaw tightened. "You're relishing this, aren't you?" Sarah's smile was slow, razor sharp. "You bet I am." Her mother sucked in a sharp breath, her patience visibly thinning. "We're still your parents." Sarah studied her for a moment, then let out a quiet, amused hum. "Funny, that didn't stop you from throwing me out like trash." Her mother's lips pressed into a tight line. "We did what we had to do." Luke gave a low, bitter laugh. "No. You did what was easy." Her father straightened, regaining a sliver of his usual composure. "Listen," he said, his tone carefully controlled, "you've made your choices, Sarah. You built a life without us. That's fine. But things are different now." He glanced at Luke before continuing. "We need to show a united front." Sarah blinked slowly, then let out a soft, disbelieving laugh that made her mother's face stiffen with anger. "A united front," she repeated. "Tell me, Dad, when in my life were we ever united?" Her father's expression darkened. "You're still a Mitchell." "No," Sarah cut in, her voice firm. "I was never a Mitchell to you. Not when I was a kid, not when I was pleading for a chance, not when you tossed me out like garbage." Her voice stayed steady, but its intensity made her mother flinch. For a moment, no one spoke. Then her father inhaled deeply. "The firm's on the brink." Sarah's lips curved into a mocking pout. "Oh, and that's my problem how?" Her mother stepped closer, her voice dropping to something almost pleading. "Sarah, you don't get it. If this goes public." Sarah raised a hand, silencing her. "Enough." Her tone was firm, unyielding. "You're not here because you're sorry for what you did. You're here because you're backed into a corner." She paused, letting the truth settle. "You don't want me back in your lives. You want to use me." Neither of them contradicted her. That said everything. Sarah exhaled through her nose, shaking her head faintly. "You let Tyler think he was untouchable. You propped him up, cheered him on, ignored his screw-ups. And now, when it all comes crashing down, you turn to me." Her father's hands clenched at his sides. "You owe us." Luke stepped forward, his voice low but edged with steel. "She doesn't owe you a damn thing." Her mother's head snapped toward him, but before she could speak, Sarah closed the gap between her and her father. "You expect me to clean up the mess you made?" she asked softly. "To save your firm, your precious reputation?" Her father stayed silent. Sarah let the quiet stretch before smiling. "Not happening." Her mother gasped. "Sarah." "No," Sarah said again, her voice calm but final. She glanced at Luke, a silent cue. Luke's tone was measured, deliberate. "If either of you tries to reach out to my wife again, you'll wish you hadn't." Her father's face twisted. "Is that a threat?" Luke didn't blink. "It's a guarantee." His words hung heavy in the air, thick with menace. Sarah took a slow breath, giving her parents one final look. "Enjoy the ruin you brought on yourselves," she said softly. Then, without a second glance, she turned. Luke followed, their steps unhurried, their departure absolute. This time, her parents were the ones left standing alone. The morning after the wedding debacle, the world felt a little brighter. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of Sarah's home, casting warm, golden light across the polished hardwood floors. She sat at the kitchen island, cradling a steaming mug of coffee, soaking in the calm. The air carried the scent of cinnamon and freshly baked bread, with the faint sound of cartoons floating from the living room where Liam sat cross-legged on the rug, captivated by his favorite show. His little giggles filled the space, a comforting contrast to the storm that had raged the night before. Sarah sipped her coffee slowly, letting its warmth settle into her. She'd braced herself for some lingering heaviness from the clash with her parents, some faint trace of doubt or sorrow. But there was none, no guilt, no grief, no longing for what might have been. Because there was nothing to miss. She'd never truly been part of their world, and for the first time, she felt completely, gloriously free. Luke stepped into the kitchen, his hair slightly mussed from sleep, his dress shirt sleeves rolled up. He carried his usual quiet confidence, but there was a softer edge to him this morning, a rare warmth in his typically sharp gaze. He leaned against the counter, watching her with a knowing smile. "You're awfully quiet today." Sarah hummed, her fingers tapping lightly on her mug. "Just, savoring the moment." Luke tilted his head. "Savoring what?" She let out a slow, deliberate breath. "Tranquility." Luke's lips curved into a smirk. "You've earned every bit of it." She had. After years of being cast aside, after fighting tooth and nail to build a life from scratch, she'd earned this, a home, a family, a future free from the people who'd once tried to break her. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Sarah arched a brow, glancing at it briefly before ignoring it. "If it's urgent, they'll leave a voicemail." Luke nodded, his expression approving. "Good call." But a moment later, a notification flashed, one new voicemail. She hesitated for a second before hitting play. A familiar voice filled the kitchen, thick with barely veiled panic. "Sarah, it's your mother." Luke let out a low, humorless chuckle. "Here it comes." Sarah rolled her eyes but listened. "I don't know what you think you achieved last night," her mother went on, her tone biting, "but this power trip of yours needs to stop. Your stunt at the wedding humiliated us. Your father's livid. Tyler's reputation is in ruins, and because of you, the firm's under a microscope it can't afford." Sarah took another sip of coffee, completely unfazed. Her mother let out a sharp breath. "We raised you, Sarah. We gave you everything." Luke snorted. "Everything? You mean a one-way ticket out the door?" Sarah smirked but stayed quiet, letting the message play. "You're being childish," her mother snapped. "You've made your point. Now fix it." A pause, then her mother's voice softened, a hollow attempt at warmth. "We're still family, Sarah. I know we've had our issues, but this firm, this legacy, it's what binds us. We need you to set this right." Sarah hit the speaker button, placing the phone on the counter so Luke could hear clearly. Her mother's next words were almost absurd. "Help us, Sarah." A long silence, then the voicemail ended. The kitchen stayed quiet for a moment before Luke burst into a genuine laugh. "That's priceless," he said, shaking his head. "They actually think you'd swoop in to bail them out." Sarah grinned, deleting the message without hesitation. "Guess so." Luke leaned against the counter, his eyes glinting with amused respect. And? Sarah shrugged. They can crash and burn. Luke's expression softened, a warm spark in his gaze. I'm damn proud of you. Sarah met his eyes, her chest tightening slightly at the sincerity in his words. She'd spent years thinking she had to prove herself to her family, to be worthy of their approval, their love. But the truth was, she'd always been enough. They just never deserved her. Luke reached out, his fingers brushing the back of her hand before intertwining with hers. They'll keep coming at you, you know. Sarah nodded. I know. Her parents would never surrender easily. They'd call, text, invent reasons to need her, because now, for the first time, she held the power, and they despised it. But she didn't care. She had a life, one they had no place in. As if picking up on her shift in mood, Luke grinned. Heard a juicy rumor this morning. Sarah raised a brow. Oh, yeah. Luke pulled out his phone, scrolling briefly before handing it to her. It was a news article, rising legal star Tyler Mitchell faces fraud allegations. Sarah let out a slow breath, skimming the piece with mild curiosity. Apparently, Abigail, Tyler's now ex-fiancée, hadn't wasted a second. She'd gone straight to the press, leaking enough details to trigger an official probe into Tyler's financial dealings. The fallout was already explosive, and it was spectacular. Sarah smirked. Karma doesn't mess around. Luke chuckled. Abigail's not holding back. She's burying him. Sarah wasn't shocked. Abigail was sharp, not foolish. She'd come close to tethering herself to Tyler's sinking ship and was now making a very public break. And Tyler? He was finished. With a fraud investigation hanging over him, his career was toast. No reputable firm would go near him now. The golden boy had fallen, and he had only himself to blame. Sarah set the phone down, stretching her arms above her head. Well, she mused, that's one less Mitchell to deal with. Luke hummed. And the rest? Sarah thought for a moment before shrugging. They're already floundering. Their firm's going under, their reputation's in tatters, and no one's coming to save them. She glanced at Luke. Think your firm might snap them up? Luke smirked. Possibly. If the price is dirt cheap. Sarah laughed, shaking her head. Savage. Luke leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. Just making sure they stay down. Sarah exhaled, feeling lighter than she had in years. She'd carried the burden of her past for far too long. Now, she had everything she'd ever dreamed of, a husband who cherished her, a son who idolized her, a future she'd forged with her own hands. And as she sat there, sipping her coffee, listening to Liam's laughter fill their home, she knew, she'd never needed them. She never had. That's all for today's tale on Top Stories Hub. Hit subscribe, leave a comment, and tell me what you'd like to see next.